Empires don't fall with a bang. They rot from the inside, a faulty drug trial here, a bribe there, a son too ambitious for his own good. I knew the collapse was coming. I just didn't expect it to wear my last name. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind me, cold and arrogant. My office sat high above it all, like a throne room made of glass. On the surface, everything looked perfect, the leather-bound annual reports, the polished mahogany desk, the Cole Pharmaceuticals logo etched into the window like a brand. But under my fingertips, the paper felt like ice, contracts with consequences, memos stained with risk. The kind of documents that don't get reviewed, only buried. It was just past midnight, and I hadn't moved in over an hour. I stared down at a report from Jakarta, a Phase 3 trial already under investigation. 27 adverse events in 10 days. The kind of numbers that get people killed or disappear them altogether. I'd seen worse. I'd signed worse. But this one was different. Because this one had my son's fingerprints all over it. The elevator chimed, one soft, metallic note that echoed through the silent floor. I didn't check the time. I didn't have to. The door opened. "Still here," Ethan said, stepping into the office like he owned it. Of course. He wore the uniform of a rising executive, custom navy suit, white shirt open at the collar, expensive watch that caught the overhead lights just so. His hair was styled, his posture sharp, his tone sharper. "You skipped the strategy briefing," he said. Again. I didn't answer. I kept reading the report, slowly flipping the page like I hadn't heard him. That's what silence does, it makes a man lean in. "You shut me out of the Jakarta expansion," he said. "I should have been on that call." I looked up. "You think this is about conference calls?" "I think this is about control." There it was. The thing he's never said but always meant. "You've spent the last 5 years keeping me in the PR booth while you and Clara run Black Ops deals through Eastern Europe and Asia. You think I don't see it?" he asked, stepping forward. "You're still playing God with my future." "No," I said quietly. "I'm cleaning up the messes you don't even know you're making." He laughed, sharp, hollow. "That's your excuse now." "My excuse," I repeated, pushing the report aside, "is that you've never been in a room where one signature costs 6 lives. You've never sat across from a dying mother who trusted a drug we rushed to market. You've never had to lie to her face because pulling the product would tank the company. You think this is just business. You still think this is about numbers." "It is about numbers," he snapped. "Growth. Global reach. Innovation." "No," I said. "It's about control. It's about understanding who dies when you make a mistake. And whether you can sleep after." He shook his head, like he couldn't believe I was still clinging to this old-world morality I'd abandoned decades ago. "You think you're protecting me," he said. "But you're not. You're stalling." I stood slowly. My knees cracked, a quiet reminder of age and consequence. "Ethan," I said, voice even. "You're the son of a man who broke the rules so you could inherit the kingdom. And you're pissed off because I didn't hand you the knife too." He stared at me, face tight with rage and something close to betrayal. "You don't get to lecture me about legacy when you've spent your life building this place out of lies," he said. "You're right," I replied. "I don't. But I built it knowing the cost. And what do you think the cost is now?" I walked to the window. The skyline blinked back, a city of illusions. Down below, somewhere, men were dying from our drugs. Women were testing our products without knowing they were part of an experiment. Children were going blind from batch inconsistencies. And our stock was up 4.7% this quarter. "I think," I said slowly, "that if you want to inherit this empire, you better be ready to burn with it." Ethan didn't respond. Just stood there, fists clenched, jaw locked. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The elevator closed behind him. Silence again. The kind that doesn't soothe, the kind that confirms what you already know. I sat back down, let the weight of the moment settle in my chest. Then I opened the bottom drawer, the one I hadn't touched in over a decade. The file inside was heavy, sealed, and old. The kind of thing that doesn't age but waits. I placed it on the desk. Didn't open it. Not yet. Next to it, a photo of Linda, our first year in business, both of us too young and too naive to know what Cole Pharmaceuticals would become. Her smile was soft. Mine was hungry. He thinks it's about trust, I whispered, brushing the edge of the frame with my thumb. He has no idea. Outside, Manhattan glittered like it always had. But inside these walls, the empire was already burning. And Ethan had just stepped into the fire. The boardroom was ice cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the temperature of the eyes in the room. Men in tailored suits, women with perfectly symmetrical smiles, all seated around a 20-foot slab of obsidian polished to a military shine. Cole Pharmaceuticals Leadership Circle. Veterans of mergers, litigations, and quarterly bloodbaths. And at the head of the table stood Ethan Cole, sleeves rolled, pointer in hand, confidence radiating like a spotlight. Emerging markets are the key, he said, clicking to the next slide. Bright graphics exploded across the screen, a heat map of opportunity. We're talking exponential growth in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Population booms. Lower regulatory hurdles. Fast distribution, faster returns. He let that sit, then turned to face the room. We're leaving billions on the table. He was good. Polished. Sharp. A younger version of myself if I squinted hard enough and ignored the blind spots. A few murmurs of interest rippled around the table. His numbers were compelling, they always were. But I could feel the hesitation. These weren't venture capitalists. These were survivors, the kind who knew that behind every emerging market was a hornet's nest of risk, unstable governments, bribery expectations, unpredictable logistics, and health ministries that played favorites. Not to mention the human cost of cutting corners. Distribution partners in Lagos and Phnom Penh are already warming up to soft commitments, Ethan said, voice smooth. I've spoken to private equity players willing to back the rollout if we move by Q2. Meridian's already circling. If we don't act, they will. And there it was. The pressure point. I sat at the far end, hands folded, expression neutral. Clara, my legal advisor and oldest confidant in the room, glanced at me. She didn't say anything, but her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. Julian Cross. Meridian. The man had been after Cole Pharmaceuticals for years. Charming. Silver-haired. Cutthroat behind the charm. Ethan name-dropping him wasn't accidental. It was strategic. And it worked. A few board members shifted, eyes darting toward me, then back to Ethan. Waiting. Testing. Ethan didn't miss it. He was feeding off it. I propose we form a special subcommittee, he said, turning back to the screen. Tasked with formalizing our expansion model. Budget recommendations. Risk assessments. Field team deployment. We don't need to delay. We need to move. He clicked off the projector. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Then Wallace Shaw, 82, twice retired, now a token emeritus presence, cleared his throat. Well, Ethan, he said, adjusting his glasses, that's certainly ambitious. Polite applause followed. The kind you give a child at a piano recital, encouraging, not committed. I waited a beat, then stood. Thank you, Ethan, I said. He turned toward me, chin high. I stepped forward slowly, letting the room absorb the shift. Then I placed one hand on the table. There will be no special committee, I said flatly. The room tensed. The proposal is premature, I continued. We're still absorbing regulatory costs from the Cervex litigation. Jakarta hasn't stabilized. Our Thailand distributor is under audit. And Meridian is bleeding capital from their last 2 expansions. Chasing them is suicide. Ethan opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Global expansion without a full regulatory risk profile is a bluff. And we don't bluff with shareholder money. This board has built its reputation on control, not chaos. We don't move on speculation. Silence. Even Clara didn't breathe. I let it hang, then sat back down. Ethan stood for a moment longer, jaw twitching. Then, with carefully measured steps, he walked back to his seat. The meeting resumed. The next agenda item passed with minimal discussion. But the room had changed. Lines had been drawn. When the meeting ended, board members filed out without looking at either of us. Clara lingered, offering a sympathetic smile. Ethan didn't wait. By the time I reached the hallway, he was gone. That evening, the gala at the Coal Cancer Research Institute shimmered with tailored tuxedos and champagne flutes. Manhattan's elite had gathered to clink glasses and pretend we weren't in the business of calculated suffering. The orchestra played something delicate and expensive. Waiters floated by with truffled canapés and aged Bordeaux. I stood near the window, sipping sparkling water. My heart didn't allow for anything stronger. A woman from the Times asked for a quote about the Foundation's work in pediatric oncology. I gave her a line I'd used 100 times, something about hope, breakthroughs, and the future of medicine. She nodded like it mattered. Across the room, Ethan stood beneath the chandelier, laughing too loudly. His arm was around a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, aggressive smile, diamond earrings the size of my knuckles. He was basking in attention, the heir apparent. A few junior execs orbited him like satellites. Then I saw him. Julian Cross. He moved through the crowd like smoke, tall, silver-haired, eyes full of calculation. He was never invited, but always welcome. That was Julian's magic. He found Ethan in seconds. They shook hands. Julian leaned in close, whispered something. Ethan laughed, then nodded. I watched it unfold, unreadable expression on my face. Julian glanced my way, offered the faintest smirk. Then he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and led him deeper into the crowd. The seduction had begun. It started with bourbon and a lie. 3 days after the gala, Ethan sat across from Julian Cross at a private table inside Lancaster Club, the kind of place that charges you for exclusivity and discretion in equal measure. Crystal glasses, red velvet booths, no cameras, no records. The waiters wore gloves. The kind of place where power met behind closed doors and never left fingerprints. Julian ordered the drinks without asking, a 20-year Glenlivet for himself, a slightly younger Macallan for Ethan. Intentional. A signal. Ethan sipped it, not quite hiding the fact that he didn't know what he was drinking. Julian noticed. He noticed everything. I liked your presentation, Julian said, swirling his glass. Bold. Unapologetic. Rare, these days. Tell that to the board, Ethan muttered, not bothering to play coy. Julian chuckled, low and smooth. Boards don't reward vision. They reward inertia. They exist to slow men like us down. That us was deliberate. Ethan leaned forward. I'm sick of the glass wall. They smile, they nod, but it's all performance. They think because I carry the name, I'm just here for optics. Julian smiled. Your father keeps you close enough to feel important, but far enough that you never touch the gears. It's a trick men of his generation mastered. Build a machine so complex no one else dares open it. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't need to. Julian leaned in. But the truth is, he's afraid of you. Ethan's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. Afraid? Of what you could do if someone handed you the right keys. Julian tapped the rim of his glass once. Then he slid a slim leather folder across the table. Ethan opened it. Inside were contracts, partnership drafts, joint venture agreements, shell logistics firms mapped to distribution routes in Vietnam, Kenya, and Paraguay. Clinical trial facilitators. Drug reformulation labs. All tied to Meridian, but more importantly, tied to Ethan. They're waiting on my signature, Julian said. But I'd rather it be yours. Ethan blinked. What's the angle? Julian's voice lowered. These trials, they don't go through American review boards. They don't wait 18 months for FDA clearance. We launch early. We control pricing. We create demand before regulation catches up. And coal. Coal becomes the distribution arm. Your father's empire becomes the foot soldier for something bigger, something global, aggressive, necessary. Ethan sat back. If he finds out. Julian waved a hand. He won't. These aren't coal contracts. Not officially. But if you were to use his signature. Ethan froze. That's fraud. It's leverage, Julian replied. Temporary. Until the merger formalizes. Then no one cares how the sausage was made. There was a long silence. And then Ethan picked up the pen. The first forgery happened at 1:42 a.m. inside my office. He knew the security rotation, the window between the janitor's last pass and the automated camera sweep. He entered using my secondary access badge, the one he'd quietly duplicated a year ago. I never noticed it was missing. The desk drawers were exactly where I left them, unassuming, unlocked. I never worried about theft. No one steals from the devil unless they're willing to replace him. Ethan laid out the contracts, turned on the green banker's lamp I never used, and traced my signature slowly, carefully. His hand trembled once. He stopped. Breathed. And then finished the final loop. 5 signatures. Each on a contract that tied Cole Pharmaceuticals to Meridian's off-books clinical trials in Bangladesh, Venezuela, and Montenegro. He scanned them, encrypted them, and sent them to Julian using a secure channel I had taught him to use when he was still in college. Back then, it was for learning. Now, it was for betrayal. When he left, he didn't look back. Clara Medina noticed the discrepancy 4 days later. She was cross-referencing our trial disclosures with quarterly vendor contracts. One clause, a payout escalation clause based on patient enrollment rates in Tier 3 nations, caught her eye. My language was always clean, ruthless, but never messy. This clause was messy. She called me the same afternoon. Martin, did you authorize these expansions into Montenegro and Dhaka? I frowned. What expansions? That's what I thought. I met her in my office an hour later. She had the contracts printed, marked, and annotated with color-coded tabs, red for inconsistency, yellow for forgery suspicion. When I saw my signature, something inside me stopped. He'd gotten the loops wrong. Just slightly. The C in Cole had a hesitation. The kind of hesitation you don't notice unless you've been writing it for 40 years. Clara looked at me carefully. There's more. Meridian's name is all over the shell firms. Julian's too smart to sign anything himself. But this is his playbook. I set the papers down slowly. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I wasn't angry. I was ready. So, Clara asked. What do we do? I looked at the skyline again, the empire Ethan thought he'd inherited. The one he was about to poison. We let him have it, I said. Clara blinked. What? I turned toward her. If he wants the crown, let him wear it. But he'll find out the thorns were never decorative. Clara hesitated. Martin, he forged your name. I know. And you're letting this happen? I nodded. Only way he learns what the throne costs. She studied me for a moment longer. And Julian? My voice turned to iron. Julian doesn't know it yet, but he's already lost. He just hasn't read the last act. When she left, I waited until the building was empty. Then I walked to the old locked cabinet behind my desk, the one even Clara didn't know existed. I pulled out a file I hadn't touched since the day Linda died. Inside were photographs, bank records, flight logs, signed memos. Years of quiet insurance. The kind of evidence that ends careers. The kind of evidence Julian Cross once paid a fortune to bury. I smiled. Everything burns eventually. The phone rang at 12:03 a.m. I was still awake, seated at the breakfast table in my brownstone kitchen, a glass of club soda in my hand, and a file folder open beside me, the one labeled Cross, offshore, in my late wife's handwriting. I hadn't looked at it in 7 years. Not since I told Linda I'd buried that chapter for good. But some debts don't expire. Some men don't change. The name flashing on my phone was Clara. I answered on the second ring. Say it, I said, already knowing. Her voice was low, but there was no confusion in it. Ethan forged your signature. 5 times. All for Meridian-linked trial sites. I closed the folder and pushed it aside. I assumed as much. There was a pause on her end. That's it? You assumed? He's been moving in the shadows. But shadows don't move unless they think the light's distracted. Clara exhaled, sharp and frustrated. Martin, this isn't a reprimand. This is criminal. If this gets out, we're talking corporate fraud. Misrepresentation. You could face federal charges. No, I said calmly. He will. Another pause. Longer this time. You're letting him take the fall. I'm letting him take what he wanted. There was a silence that stretched between us, the kind only 2 people who've seen behind the curtain can share. Finally, Clara asked, how long have you known? I looked toward the hallway where Linda's painting still hung, the one of the garden she never finished planting. Since the gala, I said. I saw him with Julian. Heard whispers about Meridian logistics. Too many coincidences started lining up. Clara's voice dropped. You set him up. I didn't answer. She lowered her voice. Does he know? Not yet. But he will. The next morning, I arrived at Cole Pharma's Manhattan Tower at 6:30 a.m., long before anyone else. The building had a different feel at that hour, emptier, more honest. Like a beast stripped of its jewelry. I bypassed the executive elevator and took the stairs to the 48th floor. A ritual. One last time. In my office, I didn't sit. I walked to the cabinet behind the oak paneling and unlocked the drawer I'd ignored for over a decade. Inside were 2 things, a burner phone, and a sealed envelope marked Clara, only if burned. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called since the Senate hearings in '09. It rang twice before a voice answered. Still alive? Barely, I replied. You still writing? The voice chuckled. I don't write anymore. I ruin people. Perfect, I said. Because I've got a name for you. Who? Julian Cross. The line went silent. I'm listening, the voice said. Later that afternoon, Ethan was all over the building, doing press prep, shaking hands, spinning new partnerships, energizing mid-level execs with buzzwords about innovation and global impact. I watched from the 48th floor like a man studying the tide. He was high on momentum. High on illusion. He didn't know he was already slipping. Clara met me in the corridor outside the elevator. He's preparing for a press event with Meridian next week, she said. Good. Let him announce it. She narrowed her eyes. Martin, if this goes sideways. It won't. Because you're controlling it? No, I said. Because I built the game. She shook her head. You're handing him the company. You're letting him walk straight into a meat grinder. I looked her in the eyes. He thinks I'm losing. That's the only way he'll keep pushing. She hesitated. What about the board? I'll deal with them later. Right now, I need them quiet. And if he comes to you? Admits it? I smiled faintly. He won't. He's still convinced I don't know. Clara looked at me like she was searching for the man she'd known for 30 years. Maybe she didn't like what she found. You're not punishing him, she said. You're preparing him to drown. No, I said, turning toward my office. I'm just showing him what drowning feels like. That night, the building emptied early. A snowstorm had rolled in, one of those slow, soft blizzards that makes the city feel gentler than it is. I stayed behind. At my desk, I pulled out the oldest file I owned, one that hadn't been opened since Cole Pharma was just a dangerous idea scribbled on bar napkins and legal pads. Inside were names. Dates. Transactions tied to Julian Cross. Evidence buried so deep it had its own gravity. I found the folder labeled Senator Aldrich, Contributions and Travel. Julian's Golden Goose. I began scanning, encrypting, building a trail. I sent 3 files. One to Clara. One to the journalist I called that morning. And one to a federal investigator in Boston, someone who owed me a favor from a pharmaceutical settlement back in 2011. The kind of favor that comes sealed in a manila envelope and never gets repaid in words. When the email sent, I leaned back in my chair. On my screen, Ethan's photo smiled in a press kit, the future of Cole Pharmaceuticals. He had no idea what future was coming. At 2:06 a.m., I stood in front of the window. The city was buried in white. Silent. Deceptively clean. I thought of Linda, how she used to say snow made everything look like it was waiting to be forgiven. But I wasn't looking for forgiveness. I was waiting for fire. The cameras loved him. Ethan stood on the stage at the Cole Meridian press event, wrapped in LED lights and synthetic applause. Behind him, an enormous screen pulsed with branding, a historic partnership, innovation beyond borders. Below it, 2 logos merged into one, Cole Pharmaceuticals and Meridian Global Biotech. His suit was flawless. His smile, rehearsed. And his confidence? Weaponized. To the investors, our patients, and our partners, he said, this is more than a merger. This is a revolution. Together, Meridian and Cole will redefine pharmaceutical innovation across the globe. The room erupted. Reporters clapped. Board members, most of whom had only seen the contracts yesterday, forced enthusiastic smiles. Flashbulbs popped. The markets ticked up within the hour. Julian Cross stood beside him, silver-haired, silver-tongued, looking like the proud mentor of a promising heir. He whispered something to Ethan, and they laughed together like old friends. Power has a way of wearing masks that make betrayal look like brotherhood. I stood in the back of the room, unnoticed. That was by design. They thought I'd already stepped aside. Ethan had made sure of it, spinning a narrative that I'd retired from active leadership to make room for his new era. The board hadn't confirmed it, but they didn't deny it either. Most were too afraid to disrupt the stock bump. Money, after all, prefers the illusion of stability. I clapped with the rest of them. One of the journalists turned to me, hesitant. Mr. Cole, do you want to say anything? I smiled, politely. Today belongs to Ethan. That was all I gave them. Just enough to look like a father letting go. Not enough to reveal what I was actually doing, waiting for the fall. Backstage, after the event, Ethan was radiant. He leaned against the green room bar, sipping champagne, surrounded by junior partners eager to orbit his glow. He was already talking about expansion timelines, regulatory hacks, patent loops, things he barely understood, but now spoke of like gospel. Julian watched from the corner, a quiet sentinel. He never celebrated too loud. That was his tell. Men like him don't rejoice. They calculate. When Ethan noticed me, the smile dimmed for half a second. Then he approached, arms wide. You came. Of course. He glanced around. Well. I nodded. You handled yourself well. He arched an eyebrow. That's it. You wanted the spotlight. I'm not here to dim it. Come on, Dad. You think I can't tell when you're playing chess? I think, I said slowly, you're so eager to be the king that you forgot the board belongs to someone else. That stung him. I saw it in his eyes. But instead of replying, he downed the rest of his glass and walked back toward Julian. That was the last time I spoke to him as a son. From this point forward, he was just another man who thought he was invincible. Julian's smugness was almost admirable. In interviews, he praised Ethan's bold vision, framed the partnership as a rebirth for Cole Pharma, and casually remarked that I had earned my rest. The way he said it, like I was a tired old man finally being put to pasture, made my molars grind. He thought he'd won. He thought the empire had changed hands, and that I had stepped off the stage without a fight. What he didn't know was that I'd never left. I had simply changed my seat in the theater. The next board meeting was ceremonial. Ethan presented his 30/30/30 plan, 30% expansion, 30% workforce realignment, and 30% reinvestment into unregulated foreign trials. Julian's language, dressed in Ethan's voice. He had charts, consultants, even an outsourced think tank to justify the projections. The board nodded along. One even clapped. I said nothing. When it ended, he cornered me in the hallway. Still nothing to say. I looked at him, slowly. What would you like me to say, Ethan? He leaned in. That you were wrong. I smiled. No, I said. I'm just early. That night, I returned home and opened the burner phone. 3 unread messages. Contact 1, files received. Cross links confirmed. Senator included. Story in motion. Contact 2, source verified. Report drops within the week. You'll be pleased. Clara, bank trails are traceable. He's in deep. Are you sure? I stared at that last one for a long time. Was I sure? Of nothing, except this: empires don't die cleanly. They collapse in fire and lawsuits. And sometimes, in silence. I responded with 3 words. Let it burn. The next morning, Ethan walked into my old office, now his, and looked out over the skyline like a man claiming land he didn't understand. Julian sat across from him, sipping espresso. He didn't fight back, Ethan said. He won't, Julian replied. Because he knows it's over. Ethan exhaled slowly, relaxing into the leather chair like it had been waiting for him his whole life. No, he said, smiling now. It's just beginning. It was. Just not in the way he thought. They said I was finished. That was the word traveling quietly through conference rooms and corporate dinners. Martin Cole is done. The once feared patriarch of Cole Pharmaceuticals had vanished from the war table. No more strategy sessions, no more late-night calls to fix the unfixable. Just a quiet retreat to his brownstone, a few sparse comments at shareholder meetings, and the occasional soft smile at quarterly press events. Ethan had filled the vacuum. Loudly. He became the face of the new era, sleek, bold, and utterly blind. At first, I welcomed the silence. Not as surrender. As preparation. I spent my mornings walking through Central Park, bundled in a wool coat, nodding at strangers who didn't know they were passing the architect of an empire built on secrets. Afternoons, I sat in the study where Linda used to read. I reread old dossiers. Refreshed contact sheets. Waited. Letting an empire collapse takes more patience than building one. Ethan thought silence meant retreat. But silence is just the sound a trap makes before it closes. Back at headquarters, he was flying. Interviews. Photo shoots. Speaking slots at tech conferences where he pitched Cole Pharma as the Amazon of global healthcare. Journalists praised his youth, his fearless disruption. His face was everywhere. Fortune, Forbes, a GQ feature where he posed with a stethoscope draped around his neck like he'd ever treated a patient. He rolled out new branding campaigns. Moved manufacturing to places no one could pronounce. Promised same-day vaccine pipelines and agile clinical deployments. The board, seduced by investor smiles and market upticks, let him play king. But underneath, the cracks had already started. Clara emailed me a red flag memo from a procurement auditor. 3 cargo containers labeled for Cambodia had never arrived. Shipment status, unknown. The FDA sent a soft inquiry about discrepancies in a Phase 3 trial summary from Venezuela, patient fatalities not matching internal documentation. And then a journalist called Clara directly. He'd gotten wind of an unregistered trial in Bangladesh tied to a Meridian-controlled shell firm. It was only a whisper. But it was enough. Bad luck, Ethan told the board when the shipment issue came up. Sabotage, he said when the FDA flagged inconsistencies. A smear campaign, he called it when 2 patient families in Phnom Penh went public with footage of sick children who'd never received informed consent. He was calm, polished, dismissive. It was how I knew he was in over his head. Real power doesn't deny chaos. It plans for it. Julian, to his credit, stayed cool. He held a press conference to reaffirm transparency. Talked about isolated procedural lapses and promised an internal audit. He even quoted Hippocrates, the audacity of which made me laugh out loud in my kitchen. He was doing exactly what I hoped, patching holes in a ship that was already filling with water. Because I wasn't just pulling strings. I was cutting lifeboats. In secret, I began making calls. Not many. Just enough. To an old investment banker who'd once cleaned dirty money through clinical R&D accounts, and owed me for keeping his name out of the SEC's mouth in 2012. To a former FDA director who now sat quietly on the board of a competing drug maker, a man who didn't like Julian, and liked payback even more. To a journalist in D.C., the same one I fed intel to during the Cross bribery scandal 15 years ago. The one who'd never forgotten I made his career. I have something you'll want to see, I told each of them. I sent redacted documents, logs, account routing numbers. And one name, Julian Cross. At the office, Ethan was oblivious. He'd begun redecorating my old office. Paintings came down. Awards stored. He had the wood paneling stripped and replaced with matte black. One of the receptionists told Clara, who told me, he even removed your nameplate from the executive hall. I didn't react. Not because it didn't sting. But because pain, like everything else, is useful when you know where to place it. On the outside, I looked like a man at peace. I took long lunches. Cancelled speaking engagements. Declined invitations to advisory panels. Ethan thought I was giving up. But I wasn't vanishing. I was becoming invisible. And when you can't be seen, you can't be stopped. Then came the message from Clara. The story drops Monday. Cross doesn't know. It's bad. I stared at it for a long time, sitting in the garden Linda planted before she died. I remember thinking how quiet it was. How peaceful. And how quickly that peace was going to end. In Ethan's world, things were accelerating. He was planning another press event. More expansion. New logos, new lingo, new lies. Julian was booking flights to Geneva to secure new investors. The future was coming. They just didn't realize it had already been bought and paid for, in signatures they forged, in contracts they never read, in people they thought were buried and forgotten. The quiet fall had begun. They just hadn't heard the sound yet. The first blow landed on a Tuesday. It was quiet at first, just a headline buried on the 5th page of a major paper. Exclusive, overseas drug trials linked to patient deaths. Corporate partnerships under scrutiny. But the byline said everything. Michael D. Templeton. The same journalist I fed in '09. The same man who tore open the Aldrich hearings and nearly took down half of Big Pharma with a single exposé. Ethan didn't see it coming. None of them did. Not until the second story dropped the next morning. Whistleblowers allege falsified trial data, lack of consent, and backdoor corporate agreements. This time, it had names. Countries. Photos of grieving families outside clinics with barbed wire fences and signs in broken English. Children with swollen limbs. Mothers holding up expired medication packets bearing the Cole Pharmaceuticals logo. And worse, documents. Signed. Stamped. Translated into every regulatory language that mattered. Suddenly, Ethan's house of mirrors had windows. And the world was looking in. At headquarters, panic hit like a virus. By noon, 3 board members demanded an emergency meeting. By 2, the FDA issued a formal request for all documentation tied to Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa trials. By 3, the Department of Justice released a statement: "We are aware of the allegations and are reviewing the materials provided by independent sources." That last line was mine. Ethan paced the executive floor like a man trying to outrun a fire in a locked building. Staff avoided eye contact. Clara told me his executive assistant quit on the spot after being asked to delete old emails. And Julian? Julian stayed calm. Too calm. He issued a brief statement through Meridian's PR firm. "We take these allegations seriously and are launching a full internal review. We remain committed to safety, transparency, and ethical medical practices." Translation: we're already shredding everything. But it wouldn't matter. The fuse was already lit. I watched it unfold from the comfort of my living room. The TV was muted. I didn't need to hear the anchors. I could see it in their eyes. The empire was bleeding. And no one knew where the next cut would land. By the end of the week, Cole Pharmaceuticals stock dropped 11%. Meridian dropped 19%. Investors flooded Clara's office with requests for clarity. Hedge funds started shorting both companies. Bank of New York froze one of Cole's international lines of credit. The Bangkok supplier pulled out. The Kenya logistics partner disappeared entirely, both offices emptied overnight. Every skeleton Julian and Ethan had crammed into the closet was now marching in formation through the front door. Ethan tried to hold the line. He called a press conference, nervously confident. "We are cooperating fully. These claims are based on distorted information from disgruntled former employees." A journalist raised her hand. "Can you confirm whether your father authorized these trial expansions?" Ethan blinked. "My father is retired." The next question hit harder. "Are you saying he had no knowledge of the contracts bearing his signature?" His pause was only 2 seconds. It was enough. The sharks smelled blood. Clara texted me after the press conference. "He's drowning." I replied with one word. "Good." Inside the boardroom, Ethan lost control. Executives stopped nodding. Department heads stopped answering calls. The general counsel quietly activated indemnity protocols. It was subtle, but irreversible. The company had begun to separate itself from its CEO. Julian watched silently from his corner seat, arms folded, face unreadable. He'd started dressing down, less tie, more rolled sleeves, like a man preparing to get dirty. But I knew what he was really doing. Calculating how far he could distance himself before the detonation. Outside, things were getting louder. The third exposé dropped on Friday. Meridian and Cole tied to off-book trials in conflict zones. Legal experts predict historic lawsuits. The footage was brutal. Armed guards at a trial site in Sudan. A doctor confessing anonymously to receiving payments in Bitcoin. A document trail connecting Meridian shell firms to procurement accounts labeled Expedited Recovery Solutions, a fake logistics company Ethan approved. And then the quote that changed everything. These contracts bear the digital signature of Martin Cole. But handwriting analysts and legal counsel suggest they were forged, likely by someone with direct access to executive credentials. That was the moment the room flipped upside down. Ethan wasn't just reckless now. He was fraudulent. And Julian, ever the survivor, began sharpening the knife. That weekend, I sat in the study and reread one of Julian's oldest letters to Linda, back when he was still pretending to be a friend. It was full of flattery, compliments about my leadership, thinly veiled ambitions. The final line stuck with me. Martin doesn't realize it yet, but I will outlast him. I folded the letter. Then I smiled. By Monday, regulators from 3 countries had opened formal investigations. Cole's legal team went into triage mode. Meridian's PR firm cancelled all public appearances. And Ethan? He was a ghost in the building he once ran like a prince. Clara told me he'd stopped showing up to executive briefings. Just sat in his office, door closed, watching the headlines bleed him dry. And I poured myself a glass of club soda. Sat by the fire. And waited. Because I knew the next blow wouldn't just shake the house. It would break it. When the lawsuits arrived, they came in stacks. Class actions. Wrongful deaths. Corporate negligence. Securities fraud. Each envelope felt heavier than paper should, the kind of weight that crushes careers and buries legacies. Ethan's name was on all of them. So was mine. But only one of us had signed anything. Cole Pharmaceutical's headquarters turned into a bunker. The lobby security tripled. Legal teams carved out war rooms on the 34th floor. No more visitor tours. No more interns with clipboards pretending to be future executives. Just whispers, locked doors, and the cold stink of corporate fear. I didn't need to be there to see it unravel. Clara kept me informed. $5 billion in pending litigation, she told me over the phone. 4 suppliers terminated their contracts this week. Japan's health ministry froze our licensing rights. We're bleeding credibility. I asked, and Ethan? She hesitated. His office door hasn't opened in 3 days. The media blitzed him. Golden Boy turns toxic, how Ethan Cole sank his father's empire. Whistleblower reveals internal emails, we can outpace regulators. Forged signature tied to CEO's son. Legal experts call it corporate arson. And the footage, that's what did it. They found video from a surveillance camera in our building, time-stamped 1:42 a.m., showing Ethan entering my office alone. He didn't look at the camera. He thought he was smarter than the machines. Julian, of course, had seen enough. That afternoon, he gave an exclusive interview to CNBC. His performance was Oscar-worthy. I had no knowledge of Mr. Ethan Cole's unauthorized actions, Julian said, voice grave. We trusted Cole Pharmaceuticals as an equal partner. It's devastating to learn that trust was misplaced. He didn't even blink when he said it. And just like that, he cut Ethan loose. Inside Cole Pharma, the betrayal was felt like a thunderclap. Board members turned. Senior staff resigned. Investors pulled their money faster than analysts could issue warnings. One bank called in a debt facility at 3 a.m., with no notice. Ethan tried to stop the bleeding, released a statement through PR, "These allegations are inaccurate and deeply personal. I stand by my decisions and will work tirelessly to protect the future of Cole Pharmaceuticals." It was 3 paragraphs too long and 12 days too late. No one believed him. And worse, no one wanted to. He showed up at my brownstone unannounced. I opened the door expecting Clara. Instead, it was Ethan, pale, unshaven, coat soaked from the rain. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. I didn't say a word. Just stepped aside. He entered like a man walking into a tomb. "I didn't know it would get this bad," he said, collapsing into the armchair across from the fireplace. "Did you think there'd be no cost?" I asked. He rubbed his face, fingers trembling. "Julian said we'd control the narrative. He said it would all settle quietly." "Julian says a lot of things," I said. He looked up. His voice cracked. "Dad. I need your help. I studied him for a long time. Not as a father. Not as a man looking at his son. As a king staring at a fallen usurper. You wanted everything," I said. "Now you carry it." He flinched. "You forged my name. You traded your integrity for applause. You burned the house I built, and you did it because you thought you were smarter." Tears welled in his eyes. "I thought I had to prove I was ready." "You proved it," I said. "You're ready for the consequences." There was silence between us. The fire cracked softly. He stood slowly. "I never meant to hurt the company." "You didn't," I replied. "You hurt yourself." He didn't respond. Just walked out the door into the rain. I didn't watch him leave. To the world, it looked like I'd abandoned him. The headlines were merciless. Cole dynasty implodes. Father silent as son falls. Martin Cole refuses to defend son in wake of scandal. The man who built everything leaves the room. Let them believe it. Let them think I was bitter. Or broken. Or cowardly. Because behind their noise, the final act was taking shape. In Julian's world, the walls were tightening. His investors were nervous. 3 of his top execs had been subpoenaed. And now regulators were tracing Meridian's payments to political PACs, including a direct wire to Senator Aldridge's re-election fund, disguised as a clinical technology grant. A document I'd buried 10 years ago. And quietly unearthed last week. But Ethan didn't know any of that. To him, I was gone. To him, this was the end. He gave one last interview, CNN, late night, dark suit, bloodshot eyes. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," he said. "I just wanted to lead." And in that single sentence, I saw the truth. He wasn't a villain. He was a child who'd never learned that thrones are built on bodies. The empire was in ashes. Julian thought he'd won. Ethan thought he'd lost. And no one knew I was still in control. Waiting. Because the real strike wasn't the fall of the protégé. It was the destruction of the man who made him think he could fly. They thought I was out of moves. That was their mistake. The thing about stepping back is that everyone assumes you've stepped down. They see you in a cardigan, sipping coffee in an old brownstone, and they forget what your hands are capable of. But I never left the game. I just learned to play it in the dark. The first domino fell when Clara filed the whistleblower lawsuit. She didn't file it as a lawyer. She filed it as a citizen, under the False Claims Act, naming both Cole Pharmaceuticals and Meridian Biotech as conspirators in fraudulent medical trials across 4 countries. The suit was armed with documents only I could have provided. Internal emails. Altered trial data. Coded language around clinical acceleration strategies, a euphemism for ignoring consent. And the jewel in the crown. A series of internal memos from Meridian's own medical director, outlining a deliberate cover-up of adverse reactions in children during the Cambodia trials. Julian had personally signed off on the redactions. Now, his signature was on the front page of the New York Times. The next day, regulators got their own gifts. 3 sealed packets arrived at 3 separate offices: the Department of Health and Human Services, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. Inside each was a complete trail of financial records, spanning 10 years. Shell companies. Offshore transfers. Stock options doled out in exchange for silence. And at the center of it all, Julian Cross. But I saved the best for last. The final file showed direct communications between Julian and Senator Aldrich, encrypted emails discussing trial tolerance expectations and contingency assurances for overseas operations. Buried in one message was a wire transfer to Aldrich's brother's company in the Caymans. $3. $2 million. Labeled, Infrastructure Consulting. The feds didn't need a second read. They moved fast. On Thursday morning, Meridian stock fell 28%. By noon, the SEC had frozen 3 of their primary accounts. By evening, the Justice Department announced a formal investigation into Meridian Biotech for corporate fraud, conspiracy, and foreign bribery. And Julian? Julian was silent. No press conference. No camera-ready suit. No smug dismissal. He vanished. For 48 hours, the man who once lectured senators about innovation didn't answer a single call. He knew. The floor had collapsed. I watched it all unfold from my living room. I didn't smile. There was no joy in any of it. Just a long, slow exhale, the kind you release after holding your breath for years. Ethan called twice that night. I didn't answer. Not yet. By Saturday, the media had caught up. Julian Cross under federal investigation. Evidence links Meridian CEO to illegal trial cover UPS. Senator Aldrich declines comment amid bribery allegations. And then came the headline that ended it. Martin Cole tied to whistleblower suit that sparked industry reckoning. For the first time in weeks, the press remembered my name. Not as a relic. Not as a passive father. But as the man who pulled the trigger. The revelation spread like fire. Julian's allies disappeared. His legal team started negotiating immunity deals. Investors abandoned Meridian like rats from a burning ship. Their headquarters in Geneva was raided by Swiss authorities looking for internal trial records. Meridian was no longer a pharmaceutical company. It was a crime scene. And Ethan? Ethan finally understood. He showed up again, this time without the arrogance, without the storm. Just a man hollowed out by truth. I didn't know you were still fighting, he said. I looked at him. I never stopped. His shoulders sank. You knew Julian would throw me under the bus. I counted on it. You planned all of this. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I planned enough. He sat down, slow and quiet. You let me fall. No, I corrected. You climbed a ladder someone else built. I just didn't stop you. He didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was low. Why didn't you warn me? Would you have listened? He looked away. Exactly. I poured 2 glasses of club soda. Handed him one. We sat there, 2 coal men in silence. I destroyed everything, he whispered. No, I said. You revealed what was already broken. He nodded. A slow, painful acceptance. I'll never be able to undo it. Then stop trying, I told him. Start over. Smaller. Cleaner. He stared at me. You think I deserve that? I met his eyes. I think you survived. That's more than most. Later that night, I received a final call. It was Templeton, the journalist. "You were right," he said. "Cross is done. The whole damn industry's shaking." "Good." He paused. "You ever think about coming back?" "No," I said. "I've already won." The next morning, I walked through Central Park. Snow was falling again. Gentle. Quiet. The same as it had when I first saw Ethan in a suit that didn't fit, asking questions he didn't understand. Now he understood. Now he knew that legacy isn't just what you build. It's what you survive. And Julian? Julian was no longer the man who outsmarted me. He was just the man I waited to bury. The man who once stood under chandeliers giving billion-dollar speeches now sat in a windowless courtroom, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big and the weight of his own arrogance. Julian Cross had finally run out of words. The indictment came fast and heavy: 5 counts of corporate fraud, 3 counts of bribery, 2 of conspiracy, and 1 charge that would follow him to his grave: negligent homicide tied to international clinical trials. He didn't deny it. Didn't cry. Just sat there, glassy-eyed, as the prosecutor read out the charges that stripped him of everything. His lawyers negotiated for bail. It was denied. He was a flight risk. His mugshot hit the front pages that same night: sunken cheeks, hair uncombed, eyes devoid of strategy. The empire was gone. His board was gone. His legacy, rewritten in shame. I watched it all unfold from my new office, a modest suite downtown, a few blocks from the noise. No skyline view. No assistants. Just 4 researchers, 2 lab techs, and a quiet space where real work could begin again. I bought it through a holding company. A research division once swallowed by Cole Pharma, forgotten in the chaos. I bought it back for pennies during the liquidation fire sale. No fanfare. No headlines. That was the point. This time, I didn't want an empire. I wanted freedom. Ethan called me 2 weeks after Julian's arrest. "I got a job offer," he said. "Small diagnostics firm. Nothing big." "Good," I said. "They know about everything." Still offered me a position. "You earned that." He was quiet for a moment. "You think I'll ever be more than the guy who wrecked Cole Pharma?" "No," I told him honestly. "But you might become the guy who never lets it happen again." He sighed. "Thanks. You don't have to thank me, Ethan. You survived. That doesn't feel like much some days." "It will." The press moved on. The cameras chased new villains. Cole Pharmaceuticals became a cautionary tale, a business school case study, a Netflix documentary, a footnote in the era of corporate recklessness. But the name? It stayed with me. Not in the headlines, but in memory. And memory is heavier than scandal. Linda would have hated all of it. She always told me the problem with power wasn't corruption, it was erosion. How ambition wears down your soul until all that's left is performance. She asked me, once, if I'd ever walk away. I lied to her. Told her I would. But I couldn't. Not until I'd made sure the last predator was buried. Now, he is. One afternoon, I walked past the old Cole Pharma tower. The building was half occupied. The gold lettering had been removed. The marble lobby that once held my name now displayed nothing but corporate leasing signs. It didn't sting. It didn't matter. Because names fade. But consequences don't. They asked me, later, if I regretted it, letting my son fall, destroying a man I once called a partner, orchestrating a collapse I could have prevented. My answer never changed. Everything Julian built was poisoned. All I did was serve the antidote in silence. The last time I saw Ethan, he looked different. Not polished. Not broken. Just, real. We sat on a park bench, the air sharp with winter. No cameras this time, he said, smirking. No audience either. He looked at me. You really gave it all up? I nodded. I gave up what needed to die. And what's left? I gestured to the lab. The team. The work. Something smaller, I said. But clean. On the television behind the deli counter that evening, Julian's perp walk played on loop. No commentary. No spin. Just a man led into a federal courthouse, flanked by marshals, face sagging with the weight of empire lost. I didn't look for long. I turned it off without a word. The men who rush to win always forget. It's the ones who wait who bury the kings.